Hey, I'm Polly McGee.
And I'm Zoe Coyle, and we are the co-pilots from Pilot Light.
We're doing this video series and audio series if you're listening on a podcast, because in our work as facilitators and daring leadership trainers and all kinds of courageous peeps, we often get a lot of questions from our clients about some of the bigger fundamental concepts. So we decided we would take some time to unpack them together and unpack them for each other. So if you haven't seen any of our other work, there's quite a few sitting up there on our website now, or on whatever channel you found this on. We've had a look at shame and vulnerability and what else, Zoe?
And empathy.
So beautiful. And when we've been talking through those videos, both of us have had moments of irritation where we're like, oh, that word, it's so overused. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about trigger words.
And which is the first trigger word that we're going to talk about?
Well, Zoe Coyle, for me, it's the word trigger.
It's so meta. Let's hear it, Polly.
Basically, listeners and watchers, you just need to either just lean in now and surrender to what's going to be 20 minutes or more of soapboxing, or you can just like turn it off and walk away. Run for your lives. So I'm going to talk about triggering to start with, because this is one that is it's like the key trigger word for me. It's so ironic. It's like a Seinfeld episode. I'm triggered by the trigger. So in my mind, Zoe Coyle, trigger is a word that should be traditionally and comes from a world of classic pathologized medical psychology and psychiatric work. If you have an incident that triggers you, we need to be like dealing with you stat, because you've got something really major going on, which is about to completely unravel you. Think about the people who have come back from war or from domestic violence who've got major PTSD. They're people who get triggered. When I hear, people getting triggered because their favorite yogurt wasn't in the store, or because someone was wearing too much perfume, it's really triggered me. I'm like, this is really, really transforming something which has actual meaning into something which is just another throwaway for us being pissed off, but that we've kind of medicalized to make it sound a bit cooler and a bit more full on. So where's my paper bag?
No, I don't like it either. And once when we were facilitating, someone came up and said to me, I was really triggered by your outfit, but now at the end of the workshop, I see you're great. And it was just, what are you giving to me across this space? It's your way of actually making some experience that's going on in you my fault. When we're not talking about the true use of the word triggering. And also my children use it. My deeply loved, deeply privileged, non-medicated children use this term. And I think as I say, the thing that really irritates me is that idea of foisting it on the other person. Just take responsibility for your emotional landscape, unless you are triggered. But it is a word that I avoid. But I have to say, I do love it when people bring it up in our facilitation, just to see a little steam coming out of your ears, Polly.
But I mean, that's a really fabulous, well, they're two fabulous examples, because I don't know what potentially would be triggering your 8-year-old, except that it's like he's learning this as code for saying, oh, mummy, you're pissing me off. Yeah. And if someone gets triggered by you wearing a black sweater with a sequined lightning bolt on the front, they clearly did not live through glam rock. Point one. And point two, it's really different. Like, dude, I don't like your outfit. I don't like your 70s aesthetic. But then, I mean, and that's a whole different story, because the projection of your own issues onto a facilitator, well, let's not go there.
But so interesting. I mean, it is so interesting. We won't go there, but it does bring us to a really interesting idea, I think, for all of us to explore when we have an emotional or intellectual response to somebody else and we think it's about them. I'm going to ask you the question, how often, Polly, do you think that's the case?
100% of the time. No, but I mean, because we can only react. We can only react. You can't react on my behalf. So this is the thing. If we don't slow ourselves down and bring some mindful presence, to the way we are. And we talked about this in a couple of our other videos, this idea of what it is to be self-aware, what it is to understand when things are happening somatically, happening in your body, because that's really what people are talking about. I had an emotional response to your jumper, which I felt, which I'm then intellectualizing to be something which isn't mine. It's really interesting. And it normalizes that language as being someone else's thing. You triggered me. It was done to me.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
wasn't of me.
Absolutely. And look, this is a slight non sequitur, but I love this quote so much, and I just want to put it in here. And I might use it every single one of these that we do until the home straight.
I want that.
But the Abraham Lincoln quote, the one where I don't like that man. I must get to know him better.
Yeah.
And I'm so interested. So just to skip back and over the top of that idea of what we hold space for as facilitators, because we're at the front of the room and people make the assumption that we're supremely confident and supremely together and non-porous. The feedback people give us directly to our face can be deeply confronting, or indeed writing down. And they'll say that, and then they'll say, but in the end, I love you so much and you're so incredible. Yeah. And I love this idea of, if someone does trigger you. Do you see what I did there? Do you see what I did? What is it to double down and because that idea that you can't hate up close? What is it to try and step towards their humanity? I love that one. Let's move on to another triggering word. We talked about the word mindfulness the other day. I mean, you and I both use that word together when we're talking together as friends.
In its traditional sense.
Yeah, in its traditional and freely and with love and respect. But another thing we find when we're facilitating, don't we, when we talk about mindfulness and placing your attention, is that the former word, it's complicated for people. Why do you think that is, Polly?
This kind of blew me away. I've got a real blind spot here because I'm so deeply in love with spirituality in all its forms. When Zoe and I were in Texas training with Brené Brown when we first did Dare to Lead training, I remember her standing up on the dais and saying, "Oh, mindfulness," but I don't like that word. It really triggers a lot of people. And I was like, "What? But that's the Dalai Lama." And then I realized that what people are hearing when they hear mindfulness is something that for them is either unattainable, unachievable, or undesirable. And it's a pressure. And it's just become this word that is so overused. Anything's wrong with you, mindfulness. In the workplace, mindfulness. With your kids, mindfulness. But what we're not referencing is the deep thousands of centuries of history that sit behind that. It's really interesting because I don't want us to transfer mindfulness into being present. Being present is really great. But being mindful it's a bigger, juicier dimension of what it is to sit with self in a meditative equipoise. That's what it triggered some people when I said equipoise. Equipoise.
It didn't me. I wanted to clap, but I managed to pull that back to keep my cool facade.
So I get people talking about her jumpers. They say to me, "You just use stupid big words all the time." That's what I say to myself.
It's really interesting. I mean, do you remember when we were facilitating a couple of years ago, and we were talking about breath and the power of breath, and Polly and I try to walk a very sensitive line, always a respectful line in the rooms we're facilitating, and I suggested, because both of us meditate and a mindfulness practice is very important to us, and I'd said it once in the room, and then a woman said, "Oh God, mindfulness, it's just one more thing that I've got to do. And I don't want to rest like that." Yeah. So there was this really interesting distortion too, that in her mind, meditation, that was the line that we're thinking, was having a jolly good rest, was opting out. And I think that that's a really interesting misconception, that it's the exact opposite, isn't it? It is bringing attention. It's an active thing to do, not a passive thing.
But it interests me because clearly mindfulness has been bundled into some sort of striving. And for many people, the idea of sitting with self and having a conversation with self, I think it is quite terrifying, because we spend a lot of time making noise and we spend a lot of time moving and numbing and doing all the things that stop us having that conversation. And if you haven't seen a video on shame and vulnerability, 2 actual separate videos, it's really worth sort of circling back and watching them, because this is really when we start talking about sitting in discomfort. And meditation is the ultimate moment where you begin to sit in discomfort. And it's not easy to start with, and to start with can take years. So it's kind of, I think for a lot of people, they have an experience of it which is not particularly great in a certain setting, the way they approach it, because they don't have anyone to guide them. And then it's really unpleasant. It's like, why would you do that? What is this thing? And then anyone is like, oh, you just need to do mindfulness. So I think it becomes really stressful, particularly if you don't want to do it.
Of course. And sitting with self, I mean, as you say, that is, it can be profoundly disconcerting. I mean,
Yeah.
I myself, a couple of times a week, I have to force myself. Like an unruly child. And when I look at that, it's not lazy, because I'm not lazy. It's what's sitting underneath is I don't want to be present with myself.
Yeah.
You know, something's going on for me where like the snow globe has been shaken up and it's going on in me, and I don't want to face it. And then very quickly I have the second idea, which is not healthy, friends. I'm not recommending this, which is I'd like a glass of wine. Those two things are really connected. Or it might be I'll have a gin and tonic. But it's so interesting. Don't want to go to the mat. Ooh, glass of wine. So just numb it down. And I'm not speaking badly about a glass of wine. A glass of wine can be a great thing, but not when it's a moving away from, not when it's a numbing. Yeah. Can we talk about my
It's not a traditional element of the meditation practice.
No, it's not indeed. In fact,
but it is definitely a traditional element of the end of day practice.
Yeah, but I've tried it a couple of times, and more than a couple of times, to meditate when I've just had, say, a sip or two. Impossible. It's so interesting, as if some part is shut down in that. Anyway, look, that's another conversation. Can I talk about, I did mention this before in one of our previous yaps, around the term leaning in.
Oh yeah, this is a good one.
And look, this one is troubling for me. And because when I first heard this concept, and tell me when you first heard it, Polly. So for me, it was associated with Sheryl Sandberg.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And that idea of, the distillation for me of that message was, women, be like men, suck it up, behave like men in the workspace, say yes to more, grit your teeth, and press your face to the grindstone. And I am not at all convinced by that white knuckling idea at all. And then the other thing that I find, this idea of, well, just lean in, just suck it up, is the abuse of self in that. I mean, I absolutely believe in healthy striving. I have perfectionistic traits, which I need to keep an eye on. But leaning in is often not a really good idea for me. Leaning in cauterizes for me porousness, presence, well-being. It's when I will choose to do something over when my body is saying, you need to stop now. You need to sleep now. You need to be quiet now. You need to stop talking now. What's your feeling about... Don't interrupt me, Polly. I'm still going. I'm still talking. What is your...
I was meditating. Who are you?
Were you not present with me?
I was.
So disrespectful.
100%.
That triggers me. Tell me, what's your feeling about lean in? Does it disconcert you like it does me?
No. But it doesn't, I think, because also when I heard it, I associated it with Sheryl Sandberg because it was kind of her catchphrase for a while. And that was a word that I swear there was like a year. It was maybe 2017 was the year of lean in, or whatever the book came out. Every person said it. And this is interesting because language is really viral. There's a virality in the way that words pass from person to person. It's like Chinese whispers. So I don't have the trigger with it because I didn't read the book. So when I heard it, I thought of it as an action, and I love it because I'm very curious and I love learning things, and it was just like, whoa, leaning in. It's like there's something exciting and fun, and I need to be closer to it, and I need to really pay attention. So for me, when I think about leaning in, it's like it is actually putting aside the other things I'm doing and giving something my full attention, and I may have to stay here for a while. And I really got to get in there. And then once I've done that, I can pull out. But it's kind of like, I like to think of it as like when stuff's tough, you lean in. It's like you lean in, you don't pull away, you don't shy from it. You say, okay, well, I'm going to go down, boots and all, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this. So for me, leaning in is an act of courage, and it's an act of exploration. But I think I have a memory, and I could be wrong, but Google will tell us, that's a couple of years after that book came out, Sheryl Sandberg circled back and said, when I said that, I had a really different life to I have now. And now I get how that was really distressing for a lot of women who suddenly felt that they weren't enough on every front, and they weren't doing leaning in properly either. So I think it's one of those things, and I say fair play to her for recognizing that we talked about this when we talked about empathy and perspective taking, that when you're in a certain situation, it might feel to you like everyone can do everything, and what's wrong with the world. And then that can change, and it takes a big person to acknowledge their perspective might have been a bit off.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. And her book, Plan B, which is the second book that readdressed that, was a really interesting book. It was a really good book. So I think, look, what I'm interested in us having this conversation is the idea that let's bring some consciousness to the way we speak. And just because something triggers me, there's that word, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I use that even without irony there. I just sort of willfully, it's like I spent a weekend with Polly joking about using the term correct all the time instead of yes. Sort of correct, I am the master. And now occasionally it still comes up when we're facilitating and I'll just say to someone, correct. And I can't ever look at you in case I burst out laughing.
Oh, you just did another one. You just did another one of my key trigger words in that sentence.
What did
this episode's never going to finish.
What did I say?
Mastery. It's one of my absolute trigger words.
Did I say mastery?
No, you weren't using. No, it's just, it's a word that, again, is one. I'm going to put that in my. I'm going to put that in my list to talk about.
Oh, that's interesting. But I love that I trust you so much, because if anybody else had told me something, I'd say, classic fourth child, I did not say that if I didn't. But with you, did I? I'm very positive.
No, you said it in the proper context of like correct as in mastery. But you see people talk about mastery all the time, and it's a sales pitch. It's like, become a master. 3 8-hour sessions and you're done. And this idea that mastery is fast, or that mastery is purchasing a certificate from Udemy after doing a couple of online courses, or that mastery is then something we sell to others as a power over. Mastery in knowledge is used as power over in our society. And it's like, if we think about the true masters, A, they would never say they're masters. B, they spent 80 years, 90 years perfecting one thing, and then they're very humble. But this sort of idea that when in mastery, I remember seeing like a course online that was like, gain mastery over mastery. Oh no, please stop it.
That's crazy.
So great. It was literally, are we going to help you to get mastery over mastery?
So I think what I'm trying to say, and I'm not going to make an assumption about what you're trying to say, Polly.
That would be right.
That words are important, and they're such a profound, fundamental way of crossing the space. And what we see, because we talk a lot about self-awareness, don't we, Paul, in our rooms, and emotional intelligence, but also the power of language. Careful with the words that you choose and how you use them. And Polly and I often talk about, when we're in the space, about when you ask someone a question, do you actually turn up and listen? When you ask somebody, how are you really asking them that, or is that just a social box that you're checking? And the deep power that is available to you to actually ask the question and stop and listen. To listen to the answer. So I try to be very careful about my language. I know you do too, Polly, and I'm also intensely fascinated in language. And full stop.
Yeah, and I think that the words build world thing is really important. The thoughts are things is also really important, and both two quite catchy little phrases. But words build world is important because we use words as weapons. We weaponize our language. We weaponize it to each other, and they're the place where we can create great kindness and great compassion and great empathy. And again, like, this is something both you and I are really fascinated in. It's one of our lifelong love affairs, is with language and with words. My perspective taking has to be often that's a particular pecadillo of ours and not of others. And I can't expect, and I can't judge, and I can't be critical. So if anyone who's thinking that we're just hacking into people with the trigger words, the point of this is to think about what sits underneath where words have come from. Words have histories. And, another one of Zoe's great expressions, words have a lot of freight for some people. And that's, I guess, where the trigger comes from. There's one more word, Zoe, that I want to put into this pantheon of trigger words, of words that are that should never be trigger words, that are beautiful, amazing, special and precious words.
What is it?
Resilience.
Oh, of course. That was the primary one that we were going to talk about. I love that you dragged that in on the finish line. Resilience. So it's so great, isn't it? I mean, we come across this all the time in our facilitation rooms, where when we ask people, what is resilience? Actually, a lot of people don't know. But we had one woman say, it's just another thing that I'm going to have to fail at. And it's another
I feel like you just do this when I hear resilience.
I know.
It's the sense of, oh God, I can't be resilient enough to be resilient again. It's just too hard.
So what does resilience mean to you, Polly?
So again, I have a good relationship with resilience. Resilience and I, we go to the pub, we take walks together. Resilience to me means that idea of longitude of life, that single events that might knock us to our knees are there to be gotten through and taken internally and integrated versus gotten over or gotten around. And for me, the resilience is the act in the moment of getting up. But it's also it's a signpost around the things that allow us to not have the joy taken from us, and that in amidst terrible situations, we've all seen footage at some point in our lives of a terrible global situation where there's been a really happy smiling child or man, or the ineffable beauty of a flower or something that we've gone, oh, even amongst all of that. And that's kind of resilience to me. Resilience for me is the story of plants and the story of animals. And I've talked more before about how that to me is one of my elemental sort of set points. Our planet is still here after horrendous abuse. You know, there is a capacity for things to evolve and to keep going, no matter what happens around them. And every day we just keep on flowering, we keep on growing leaves, we keep on getting up. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. If you want to see resilience, look at a bushfire.
Or look at Chernobyl. I saw photographs of Chernobyl
amazing.
the other day. How nature has reclaimed it.
It's like it's hugging it. It's so wild, really, and it's so beautiful.
It is beautiful. So for me, resilience is about that process of being able to feel your pain, but to get up again. So it's not a denial of the pain. And there have been a couple of people that have been instrumental in teaching me how to do that better. Obviously, deep friendships in my life. You, Polly, are absolutely there with that. Martin Seligman. So learned optimism and the optimistic child. This idea of realistic, applied optimism, learning optimism, invaluable. Carol Dweck, growth mindset.
Amazing.
So for me, it was, as I would say, perfectionistic traits, and I know you have them too, Paul, that idea of...
bullshit.
I'm full of lies, is that idea that I haven't achieved this yet. And that small word of yet being affording so much grace. Also, going back to our episode about shame, understanding shame has allowed me to be far more resilient. That when I go through that voice of the shame voice that we talked about before, the I am bad, as opposed to guilt, I did something bad. When I can recognize what shame is, I can take that hook out of my belly and move through. And it's not about denying it, but it's just, oh, I'm in that space where I don't feel enough, or I don't feel lovable, and then the other great thing, and I don't think we talk about getting older enough in beautiful ways. Maybe we should do a yabber about that at some point. I just, I had my birthday last year, and a couple of people sort of said to me, oh, your youth is dead. And I just sort of thought, fuck off is what I thought, because getting older is a privilege denied to many.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're so rewarded for paying attention and doing the work if we have some luck with us. And I'm deeply aware of my own luck. But that idea of learning that what kicks you to the ground, you can restore. And I feel so grateful for that.
There's actually a lovely piece that I often think of in Brené Brown's Dare to Lead, where she talks about the Stockdale paradox. And it's really been on my mind in terms of what resilience is. And so she talks about General Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war. And when he came back, he was asked, what is it that allowed you to mentally stay resilient and to be able to get through something that many other people didn't get through? And sort of Brené paraphrases this in talking about sort of like productive optimism. Anyway, so old mate Stockdale says, well, the people that made it were the people that pretty much were realists and lived in the moment. The ones that didn't get out were the ones that were saying, we're going to be out of here by Christmas, and then Christmas would come, and we're going to be out of here by Easter, and then Easter would come, and they died of a broken heart. Whereas when we're in the present and when we're like, this situation's bad, but I'm going to get through each day, and that's going to be a win, they're the ones who made it out. And I think it's a really nice, it brings in that idea you're talking about with optimism, where optimism can't be blind faith. Optimism has to be, this is a shit situation, but it's not going to be forever. And I think we've seen a lot of that during COVID times this year, where you know, there's interesting stats on the optimism in communities, even where there's been a lot of death, because we know that it's not going to be forever. And so if we just get through this one more day, and I love that. I think it's a really interesting sort of thing to think about. And I think probably at a period of time I used to do a lot of everything's fine, it's all going to be great, we'll get out of here by Christmas. And it's much nicer to go, oh, actually, let's just have a look at all of the expanse of things outside of binary, not good, not bad, just what is, and not attaching sort of like, this is great, oh, that's terrible. It changes the way I've seen the world and the way I react in the world.
That is a deeply profound lens shift, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it really also moves you out of victim.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
And I want to flag Sean Akers' work here for any of you. We'll speak about him again later on, but his work around gratitude and specifically around mirror neurons is beautiful. And he has a strategy for moving towards greater happiness and a gorgeous definition of happiness. I really hear what you're saying, and that lens shift for me has been really powerful too, and it's helped me to, as I say, step out of victim. That idea of things being done to me, to take it less personally. And when I take things less personally, when we collectively, then we're more in connection, aren't we? And that brings me to the last thing I want to say, and I'm not silencing you, Polly, but this idea of hope, I think, is so important, and it's of course connected to optimism, but that hope can go away and we can reclaim hope, and it's a counterpoint to cynicism. And I worry about cynicism as a way of moving through the world. And for those of you that don't know about it, have a look at the rat experiment. If you put a rat in a bucket of water, it'll swim. And I can't remember the exact amount of time, but I think it's about 43 minutes, and it'll drown. But if you take it out just beforehand and then pop it back in, it'll swim inordinately longer.
And if you give it some delicious cocaine, it'll go for much, much longer. Well, that could be a different experiment.
But I often think of myself as that rat. And I think I'm just going to take myself out of the bucket for a minute. And now I'm going to go back in and I'm just going to keep swimming. All right. So, dear people, thank you so much for staying with us today. If you want to connect with us, chat to us, send us any questions. You'll find us on our website, which is pilotlight.co. So www.pilotlight.co, not .com. That's a trick for young players, isn't it?
Yes.
As we said, that we've been yabbering away for a while, some other casts. We're going to come back and offer you some more. And we wish you well. We hope you're doing well in the world. We hope that you're not too triggered by this mindful talk around resilience, and that you embrace some optimism and some hope. And for God's sake, lean in.